Montero Lamar Hill, otherwise known as Lil Nas X, is arguably the biggest pop star in the world. And he came out as gay on the last day of Pride Month 2 years ago. That he was able to do so in the orbit of hip hop and country genres that have historically snubbed queer artists was indeed groundbreaking. And after winning Video of the Year, Lil Nas X knew in a passionate acceptance speech, or he said in a passionate acceptance speech at the MTV Video Awards, first, I want to say thank you to the gay agenda. Let's go, gay agenda. Now, some folks in the hip hop world applauded Lil Nas for acknowledging the LGBT community during his acceptance speech, while others were openly critical. So the question I'm asking today is 22-year-old Lil Nas X upending the hyper-masculine world of rap music and forcing it to grapple with its homophobic past and some would even say presence? Experts weigh in, all coming up next.
Live from Los Angeles, this is the Special Report with Areva Martin.
Here for my leadoff discussion is Jarrett Hill. Jarrett is the president of the National Association of Black Journalists, Los Angeles, and the co-host of the Fanty podcast. He's also a returning guest to the Special Report. Good morning and good to see you, Jarrett.
Thank you for having me, Areva. I'm always happy to be with you.
Oh, lots going on, particularly in the world of hip hop and pop culture. And I know you have your fingers on the pulse of this world. So I couldn't think of a better guest today as we wanted to, really dig into this topic around hip hop culture, Black men, and, what's happening because of Lil Nas's, often controversial appearances, the way he dresses, the language that he speaks. And, at the MTV Video Awards, he wore this shoulder-bearing lavender Versace suit dress. Some, again, applauded him for his fashion choices, and others are, raising a side eye at Lil Nas X. Tell us, what's happening, particularly in the hip-hop community, as Lil Nas just gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
I think Lil Nas X is challenging all of the norms of the hip hop community, right? We've seen plenty of folks that have been rumored to be queer in hip hop and R&B, and some of them are some of the biggest names that we know. But also, we've always seen like this undertone, sometimes overtone, of like severe homophobia within hip hop culture, right? And so I think that what's interesting about Lil Nas X is he came out with his first song, no pun played there, but like he came out with that first single and, it was controversial because it was kind of rap, but it was kind of country, right? And it went on to country charts and then it got pulled from country charts because whiteness, and that's a different conversation. But like the way that whole situation kind of erupted, right? It really blew up his opportunities. I worked on a queer radio station every day back when that song came out. And it had such an impact on people that there was a conversation about this queer rapper, country music song, country artist. And so it was it was an eye-opening moment for a lot of folks to just kind of sit up and pay attention. And what's been interesting with Lil Nas X for me is, if I'm being completely honest, he's been out for about 2 years and I've never taken him super seriously. I've always kind of seen him as entertaining and fun and like, always going to give us like some kind of a stunt. But then the album Montero came out and I was really impressed. Like I came out of that album thinking like, oh, he really is saying something here. He wants to have a conversation about something. And I don't think I had an appreciation for him, which I'm embarrassed about now. We talked on our show about it. We did a whole episode on him as well. And like I was saying, I'm a little bit embarrassed that I wasn't taking him seriously enough to begin with.
Yeah, that performance that he did, one, we showed him on the red carpet in that, beautiful Versace suit dress. And then he actually performed at the award show and he was topless. He had this group of dancers and, they were performing in these like hot pink pants and, shirtless. And that also caused a lot of, controversy in the media. What do you think people... how are they perceiving him? And you are part of the LGBT community, so, but you talk to folks, from every community. So what are you hearing? Like after that performance, what was the buzz that you heard?
What I actually thought was really interesting about the Lil Nas X performance is, yes, he came out in that gorgeous outfit on the carpet and then did his performance. And there was, all of the queer conversation around him, but nobody was talking about the fact that Normani had an even more queer moment, in the same show, right? Normani, who is North Star, I love Normani. She brought out Tiana Taylor and did a nod or reference to Janet Jackson's All For You tour, where she brings up someone on stage, she dances all over them, does like a makeout moment. No conversation about Normani doing that, right? No one took a second look at it, especially all of the rappers who were so upset about, and I mean, they're very specific rappers, right? Who are very upset with Lil Nas X for existing, right? For having any kind of space in the hip hop community or in the rap world. But like Normani, oh yeah. And that really talks about what's really at the core of what we're getting at, right? This is about misogyny, this is about patriarchy, and this is about homophobia. And I think that the ways that we can see that is because a man being gay is for a lot of people, has something to do with his feminization, right? And feminization is really the problem for a lot of people. But like a woman being a woman, oh, whatever. Men want to see that. Men want to like fawn after it. Men want more of it. And so I think that was a perfect example that night about what was really happening, what the real problem was.
That's such an interesting point. I want to bring on Roy Kinsey now. Roy is a queer identified rapper and Chicago-based librarian. And he's sitting in this really beautiful mood light because it mirrors some of his album covers. Good morning, Roy, and welcome. Jarrett just said something really important, and he said that, Lil Nas X and the rap community's response has more to do with how he's challenging, traditional patriarchal notions of masculinity, because you didn't see the same response when two female rappers at that same award show were, engaged in sexual, kind of conduct, or sexually, I guess, suggestive, I'll call it that, conduct. And you are identified queer rapper. What has your experience been like? How have people, received you, and what are some of the feedback that you've gotten when you have been open about your sexual preferences? I think you're mute. Oh, you're on mute, Roy.
Sorry about that. It's been fairly mixed. I have to say, though, being a queer identified rapper and really coming from the tradition of hip hop and hip hop culture and understanding that it was for me to tell my story. This was a space where you don't necessarily ask for the mic, you snatch the mic. That's, in the tradition of hip hop. And so in my earlier albums, when I was, talking about women that I was sleeping with and not using the proper pronouns, it got to a point in my rap career where I felt like I was being a fraud. And so I knew that I was having to, the duty was on me to create the music that I wanted to hear as a fan. And that's what a lot of people will tell you all of the time is artists make the music that they want to hear. It's our responsibility. And so I personally just felt better when I came out and changed the pronouns on my third album, or on my fourth album, wrote songs to my then lover. Those were really, really important things for me to do. And talking about courage, it's not necessarily a character trait as much as it is, a list of acts that you continue to participate in. And so since then, I've been received well by my community in Chicago and by people that listen to my music, because these stories need to exist. This is the evolution of hip hop. It is not asking these old gatekeepers if they're okay with us existing. It's actually us creating that space and being like, yo, we've been here the entire time. And now we're, here to tell our stories.
So you mentioned these old gatekeepers. Let's talk about Jarrett DaBaby. DaBaby is hardly old. Is new to the scene himself, not much older in age than Lil Nas X, but yet, he's had a whole lot to say. and has, gotten himself in a lot of hot water for some homophobic, comments that he's made. He's tried to walk them back, but then even in walking them back, he's, called people crybabies who complained about his comments in the first instance. So, on one hand, you could say it's generational and the old heads, as Roy referred to, but then when we look at DaBaby's young. So he's of he's of the same generation as Lil Nas X. So why are we seeing someone like DaBaby, who's in that same generation, having some of those same, feelings and holding on to those old homophobic tropes?
I mean, the truth of it is homophobia doesn't have a generation, an age, or, a location, right? And I mean, I've said this sarcastically, but I also mean it seriously. Like, DaBaby is a person who chose to name himself DaBaby, and then we're wondering why he's being immature and acting like a child, right? But I think if we think about DaBaby, what's interesting about it is the conversation I was hearing a lot of friends have in like shows that I listen to. It was that it's so interesting that DaBaby has such specific references about what he's talking about, what's happening out in the parking lot. If you know about DaBaby's comments that he made at the concert that he was in, he was talking about, I'm with Areva Martin, so let me use better language. That he was talking about like sex that was happening out in the parking lot, allegedly, and the consequences of that sex. Areva, I'm really being respectful for you.
No. Let's make sure people understand. What's he talking about? Oral sex?
He's talking about men having sex in the parking lot, right?
Okay.
And about
So
HIV
anal
and AIDS.
sex. Was he talking about anal sex?
Well, he's talking about oral sex and all kinds of things like that, and talking about, sucking dick in the park, and that's the language that he was using, right? About the parking lot. I just said that to Areva Martin. What is happening? But I will say that, like,
we can't have a conversation about hip hop and not use some explicit language. We just can't.
Listen, it's your show, and if we can do it, let's do it, right?
Let's do it. Because otherwise, we're talking in code and nobody understands. So
exactly. But like a reference like that, right? To have that kind of conversation, that is a very queer reference to be making from a straight man. And so it kind of like raised some eyebrows, right? I mean, it was like,
see, I didn't know that. Okay.
No, it's a very specific reference. And so like, Roy and I both are a part of the Black Gay Agenda. We both got the blonde hair notification that happened a couple of weeks ago, apparently. And so, but like,
y'all should have told me, because I got some blonde hair. I could have been rocking it too.
The blonde hair is new for me, but it's not a part of the gay agenda, but it'll work for this conversation. But I will say that when we hear people like DaBaby making these comments, or Boosie or whomever else, it's like, y'all are really, really pressed about this gay man. And a friend of mine who is a white comedian, and he's been talking about Black queer things that he's been seeing. He was saying, if you see something and it immediately makes you think about two men having sex, you might be the one that should be asking some questions about your own sexual identity, and not me, right? And so when we're thinking about Boosie, when we're thinking about DaBaby, they have so much to say about this culture that they seemingly know nothing about, right? No. And like, they have no opinions, they have no experience, but they have so much to say about what Lil Nas X is doing and what other queer folks are doing. But then the other part of it that's interesting with DaBaby is DaBaby is talking about HIV and AIDS in ways that are about the 90s, right? Yeah. About dying within a couple of weeks. That's the 80s. It's like, what are you even talking about? Like, where is this even coming from? So there's so many questions that come up when we hear these conversations about queerness and through the lines of Blackness. And the last thing on that is, I often hear Black people talking about queer people the same way that we hear white people talking about Black people. Right? When we talk about how queerness is, it's all of the myriad ways that we hear people talking about queerness being wrong, it being this, it being that, like, it misses the intersection of Black and queer, right? That Black queer folks do exist, but it also, it speaks in the same way that we hear Black people talking to white people about how you don't see racism, you don't hear racism, you don't understand racism. It's the same exact conversation. And that's a lot of the way that that I will describe it to clients or people that I'm working with when we're talking about homophobia. It's like, you sound like white people talking about racism right now. You get that, right? Yeah. And it helps to unpack it.
No, and that's really an important point, because Black people, are quick to defend, other Black people when they think someone's being racist or they're making racial slurs. But you're saying that, there's not that same response when they're making homophobic slurs. And I thank you for pointing out that there are these specific references that, people in the gay community know. And it does cause you to question, how does people, because I didn't know it. Of course, I knew the HIV reference was totally outdated and ridiculous, but that's a really interesting point. And Roy, I'll ask you, you mentioned gatekeepers. So at one time, Jay-Z, who is now very much evolved, and his own mother has come out as lesbian, and he's embraced his mom. But Jay-Z, started a beef with Prodigy by calling him a ballerina and flashed this, big picture, on the screen at a concert. How important do you think it is that we've seen the new, evolved, enlightened Jay-Z? He has such an influence on the hip hop community. So how important do you think his evolution is in terms of maybe getting other folks to come into, the knowledge or the realization that he has that, queer rap artists are just as talented and just as deserving as, straight rap artists?
Yeah, I think it's essential. I was just thinking about that earlier when we're thinking about Black masculinity, especially in hip hop. So many of us get our lessons from hip hop records, right? And that's a say in a lot of ways, but I did. Rap raised me. I love Jay-Z. But so to hear an album 444 where he's introducing these ideas that we don't traditionally hear, when he says something like, in the future, somebody playing football with your son, he's talking about, or the Godfather line where he's like, I watch a man who don't take care of his family can't be rich. I watch Godfather. I missed that whole thing, right? So he's bringing in these conversations about fatherhood, or talking about, the best friends that he has made with his mother, and then had these really important round table talks with all of these Black men as the album was coming out, and introduced us to new ideas and introduced us to new images that we haven't seen. And it was very, very important as hip hop is growing older, 40 some years old. We still have a long way to go when it comes to understanding that there are generations after us that need our guidance and that need our survival. Right. So us being the one, I grew up, I'm a rapper, but also found a lot of the lessons that I needed in libraries. I'm a librarian as well. And so me being able to find these stories and pull something like James Baldwin off the shelf, or No Ashes in the Fire, or, All Boys Aren't Blue. It is our responsibility at this moment to leave things behind so the next generation doesn't have it as hard. And so I love what Jay-Z has done. Anybody that knows me knows that that's, one of my favorite rappers. And I wanted to continue in the legacy. When I made the album called Kinsey, a memoir, it was very much in the line of wanting to serve my community and add to the canon that kept me alive and that helped me survive up to this point. That's our responsibility as artists. I know that a lot of times it looks as though we're supposed to come and take things, from the culture. We're supposed to want fame, want wealth, want money. But if you're called to be an artist, you're called, it's a duty. And so I take that responsibility very seriously to the generations that come after me and the people that needed to hear that music. I was a person that needed to hear the music that I made.
Well, that's really powerful, Roy. And I hope everyone will get your album, Kinsey, a memoir. And yeah, Jay-Z, Jarrett, was very vulnerable. He did an interview with David Letterman, talked about crying, when his mother told him, about her relationships with a woman. Why is it that rappers, as you said, why do you think, T.I. and Boosie have come out in defense of the baby? T.I. is closer in age to Jay-Z. So I know you say this isn't generational, age doesn't matter, but you tend to think as people get older, there is a certain maturation process that starts to kick in. And, most people do evolve and their thinking starts to change. But T.I., didn't he say he wouldn't let his son watch any of Lil Nas X? I mean, he's been pretty tough on Lil Nas X.
I mean, I think what's interesting about folks like T.I. and Jay-Z is like some of them evolve and some of them don't, right? Like we have plenty of grandfathers and uncles and aunties and, big brothers and whomever who have not evolved and have chosen to continue to stay where they are. I think what's interesting about it, if we're thinking about it through the lens of hip hop, is like hip hop's roots is in resistance, right? Hip hop's roots is in talking about who we are, what we're not going to put up with, F the police, like all of that, right? Like that is like where hip hop comes from. And so like this idea that we are now using our hip hop voices to like oppress another group of people, oftentimes who are Black, right? Because like they're not out here talking about Adam Lambert and Elton John or whomever. They're talking about Black folks, right? And so like the idea that we're using our Black platforms and our Black ass voices, right, to be able to come out and like disparage a Black person who is making it in the industry, I think that's really interesting. And the ways that like we see even within the movement, the way that Black queer folks have often been in the forefront of the movements for civil rights, for Black Lives Matter, for all of these things. Black queer folks are at a multi-intersection, if you will, right? Especially if you're a Black queer woman, you're at 3 intersections of being a woman, being queer, and being Black. And right. So I think we have to think about the most marginalized among our communities and like, how are we supporting them? Because again, this is Black folks acting like white folks when we're thinking about racism, when we're thinking about oppression, when we're thinking about privilege, when we're thinking about so many different things. And I'm happy to see someone like Jay-Z using his privilege and his platform and his power, right, to be able to kind of shift that conversation. But I know that there are some folks who are looking at it and being like, well, this is exactly like when white people, right, be like, oh, well, I have a Black friend now and I see it differently, right? And it's like, we appreciate that you see it differently and that you're using that privilege and your whiteness, right? Similarly, that's a conversation that we're seeing that's happening more and more with folks who are evolving and being able to see it a little bit differently.
T.I. Jarrett, though, the comment that I read that he said was, he didn't want his kids viewing Lil Nas X's performances, and he says he respects gays, but he questioned whether gay people had more rights than heterosexuals. Where is that coming from, this notion? I'm not sure what he's talking about, but is there some sense that gay hip hop artists, and maybe it was a diss to Lil Nas X thinking that he, blew up faster, quicker or something because he is gay? I don't know. Do you know like where that was coming from?
I mean, well, Areva, at the risk of like belaboring a point, I would also say like, reverse racism is a really big issue in our country. When we think about reverse racism and the ways that white people are harmed by reverse racism and the ways that white people just really struggle to get over reverse racism, it's the same exact conversation, right? Like the idea that Black queer people or queer people in general have more rights, like, number one, it's fundamentally wrong, right? Like it's data and information wrong, right? But like the fact that Lil Nas X is getting attention in a way that T.I. cannot, the fact that Lil Nas X is having conversations that Boosie cannot have, right? That is the part of the privilege that they're upset that they don't have access to. And I don't even know that it's privilege so much as it is access, right? And people being interested in a way that they'll never have a conversation with T.I. But also, like, if we're thinking about T.I.'s comments about Lil Nas X or about women or about whatever, we also want to remember that T.I. is the person who is like under indictment, if I'm not mistaken, for like sex crimes against women and sex trafficking, right? And like T.I. is the one who—
I don't think he's under indictment. I think there was some investigation.
I believe there are charges that are there's an investigation and maybe there are charges, right, against him and his wife. But like we also know T.I. is the person who is going to his daughter's gynecologist meetings and checking to see if her hymen is intact, right? Like T.I. has a lot of really problematic ideas about sex and sexuality. And so the idea that he's like not letting his kid watch Lil Nas X's video performances on the VMAs as if he can't see them on Instagram, right? Or as if he can't see them on the internet machine, right? Like the idea that parents are shielding their children from these kinds of images as if that is going to keep them away from any kind of knowledge of it is ridiculous. And the idea that like seeing queer people is going to make people queer is ridiculous because it's like, well, they saw your straight self raise them, and we all have straight parents that raised us, and that did not make us straight. So that's not how that works.
Yeah, and I just want to make sure we're saying allegedly T.I. is under some kind of investigation for something related to sexual related activity. We don't know where that's going to take us, but I think your point is well made about some of the stuff we're seeing in the news around him. I do want to ask you about Lil Nas X's latest album, the video, the satanic imagery, it put the internet and Republicans in particular in a frenzy. Even found himself in a quarrel with the governor of South Dakota, Kristi Noem, who said, "We are in a fight for the soul of our nation." So what do you make of a governor of a state, a Republican female white governor, weighing in on the images in a video of a hip hop artist? I don't think that happens every day.
It happens all too often. I think, with Boosie, with DaBaby, with this governor, T.I., there is a lot of conversation being had around DaBaby. And as much as we love and praise Lil Nas X, it will also, I think, attract so many people that will have the opposite to say to him, or they will use that as a talking point. They will use that as a point to further their agenda and put ideas out that they are comfortable with talking about. And so a lot of this, to me, although it's very, very hateful, I thought that it was very vile. All the things that DaBaby said, I hated that T.I. came out and supported him. It also was a grab for attention. When you're in the entertainment industry and you are, trying to play the fan game. This is before Montero broke all the Spotify records. Okay, they were, I guess, going toe to toe to Baby and Lil Nas X. And so when he dropped, the video with Montero State Prison, I just think that kind of ruffled DaBaby's feathers a little bit because he got dethroned by this queen. And I loved it. And we loved to see it. And that was the problem. That was the problem with, I think, so many people, because this was not a space that we were supposed to have. Yeah. And Lil Nas is brilliant. Lil Nas has not lost. Lil Nas is brilliant when it comes
to He's winning.
He is winning. It's such a beautiful thing to see. And it's a win for all of us because nobody thought that he would have this spot. So it's a lot of jealousy. It's a lot of envy, I believe, as well, that is coming into play when these hateful remarks are coming in. And there's a false equivalency that is happening because they thought that you can come out and be homophobic and that would be the same as, this queer person coming and telling their truth or telling their memoir, right? And it's not the same. And that's where I think we've gotten it all mixed up for so long when it comes to homophobia and this hierarchy that exists within hip hop.
Areva,
question for you, Jarrett. Yeah, go ahead. I'll give you the last word.
Can I just touch on what Roy was saying? Because I think he's so right that it is an attention grab, but also I think we have to think about it's an attention grab because so many of the people that follow a Boosie or a T.I. or whomever else also believe what they're saying, right? Mm-hmm. When we see that demonstrated in the way that people respond, all you got to do is look through the comments, right? Or the retweets and the quote tweets, because we know that they are not alone in that perspective. And as Roy put it, it is an attention grab because that talking about Lil Nas X is going to spark something. It's going to start a conversation about queerness, similarly to the same way that we see over on TikTok and stuff like that, where white creators are taking from Black creators, right? And to try and get attention of the dance that they're doing or whatever. Mm-hmm. Similarly, we see we know that T.I. knows that if he comes out and says this thing, it is going to have this ripple effect. And I mean, similarly, we know that Jay-Z knows that coming out and saying what he says is going to have a ripple effect and have an effect in culture. And so both of them know that what they're doing is going to have an impact in the conversation that is being had nationally. And one of them is using it for good and one is using it for DaBaby. So.
That's a brilliant line. Well, one thing we know for sure, Lil Nas X did not become the world's biggest pop star in 2 years simply because the queer community supported him. So there's a whole lot of straight men and heterosexual women around this country, around the globe that are supporting him. So they may not come out publicly and do so, but the queer community, as powerful as it is, would not have it's just not the size to his audience. His fan base is so much bigger, and it includes lots of straight men. A lot of those straight men are Black. Thanks so much, Jarrett. Thanks, Roy. Again, that's Roy Kinsey, and his album is Kinsey, a Memoir. Make sure you check out his music. Check him out. He's doing incredible things, incredible voice. And make sure you check out that Fenty podcast that my good friend Jarrett Hill co-hosts. Lots of good stuff going on there as well. I
had a whole different gay agenda with the hair in that photo, so just let it rock. It's fine.
I love it. Take care, guys. All right. My next guests are Marcus Stanley. He's Director of Programs for the Gilead Compass Initiative at the University of Houston. He's also the president and founder of Black Power, Liberation and Healing Now. Also joining us is Trevon. I think I got it right. Trevon. I want to call him Trevon, but I think it's Trevon. Trevon Mayers. He's the Senior Director of Advocacy and Community Engagement for New York's LGBT Community Center. Mr. Mayers, correct me and tell me your name again one more time so I can get it right.
It's Trevon.
Trevon. Okay, Trevon. Welcome, Trevon and Marcus. One thing, we've been talking a lot. I was talking to Jarrett and Roy a lot about Lil Nas and the conversation that he sparked around the country with his music, with his videos, with his images. But I think one thing that gets lost on people is that Lil Nas X is more than a singer and an entertainer. He is a public health ambassador and a philanthropist. Talk to us, Marcus, about what Lil Nas X has done in terms of the work that you do around HIV and AIDS.
Thank you. First, thank you for having me, Reva. This is a great pleasure to be here. So first of all, I want to talk a little bit about the Gilead Compass Initiative, which is the initiative that I work for. The Gilead Compass Initiative was a $100 million investment in the South to address HIV stigma in the South. And the Gilead Compass Initiative is a small piece of that $100 million commitment. And the initiative is made up of 4 coordinating centers: Emory University, whose wheelhouse and focus is organizational structure. So it's looking at your board, your mission and vision, making those things that keep the organization afloat. The University of Houston, where I am the project officer, we are looking at mental health, trauma-informed care, harm reduction, those things. And then we also partner with the Southern AIDS Coalition, or SAC, who is focused on HIV stigma. And the last coordinating center that we work with is Wake Forest University, which looks at faith in HIV. So as this coordinating center, what we do is we work with organizations across the South. Our main focus is to work with grassroots organizations, or organizations that traditionally don't have the structure or funding structure to actually compete with big corporations and organizations. And we're working with these organizations. We entered into a partnership with Lil Nas X when he was releasing his Montero album. And what this partnership was around, he wanted to bring attention around HIV stigma, as well as faith and love. And with partnering with us, what he wanted to do was set up some sort of way where he can have donations sent to organizations that we
That's
work
that baby registry, right? He set up what officially we think of as a registry. You go into a baby shower, you go online, you find that list of what the parents say they want for the baby, and you buy it. So he used that same concept of a baby register. So he attached a foundation, a grassroots organization name to each of his songs. So therefore, as you were downloading that song or buying that song, you could actually then learn more about that organization and donate to that nonprofit. I want to bring you in, Trevon. How big was that? I mean, because again, there's all this conversation about DaBaby and Boosie and T.I. and this, beef they have with Lil Nas X. But I don't know if many people know that here this young man is, he's only 22 years old, that, he said, this isn't just about me and my fame and about making money for myself. I want to help grassroots organization. How big is this?
Well, first, thank you for having me, Areva. I really appreciate the opportunity. But to your point, I think it's really interesting that, a lot of the relationship between Lil Nas X's art and his advocacy did not get the same amount of attention as his sexuality in media. But to me, this is a really big step in sort of like continuing that relationship to build awareness and using his platform in a very positive way. So I know that even when the Industry Baby video dropped, he also partnered with the Bail Fund around raising awareness around decarceration and de-investing from the criminal justice system. And it was really surprising to me because, most of the conversation and the discourse around that video was about the video itself, about sort of like what we've talked about earlier in the show, about sort of like Lil Nas X's presentation in the hip hop space, but not about his advocacy efforts and not about how he was really highlighting areas and issues that need to be highlighted within community, but just wasn't. And it's also interesting to see at his age, he's 22 years old and he's occupying a space, he's getting a lot of attention, and not everyone has to use their platform in that way. So I'm excited that he is.
Yeah, no, really important. And I was, shocked myself to learn, because I didn't know that not only was he raising awareness about HIV and AIDS and nonprofit organizations working with communities that have been impacted by HIV and AIDS, but that bail, elimination of cash bail in the criminal justice system, which is a universal issue. It's not a queer issue. It's not an LGBTQ issue.
Mhm.
It's an issue that impacts every American that has found themselves caught up in the criminal justice system. And particularly, it impacts the Black community, because we know that cash bail leads to a lot of the disproportionate outcomes and processes that happen in the judicial system. So again, not enough media attention, I think, at all in conversations about him basically as a civil rights activist. Let's just call him what he is. We talk about Black Lives Matter and some of those leaders. I mean, that tying money and resources to nonprofits working on those issues makes him an activist in the truest of words. The other thing I'll ask you, Marcus, in dropping that new album, tying those nonprofit organizations to certain songs on the album, he also released these images of him, before he dropped the album, images of him appearing to be pregnant. Got a lot of, again, negative pushback about those images. Some would say they, provocative purposely to get people talking. That's how you sell music. That's how you sell books. That's how you get people to watch your movies, your videos, whatever it is. But why do you think people had such a hard time with those images? Again, ultimately, when the album dropped, lots of nonprofits profited financially from his generosity, but those images caused a lot of, controversy.
So when you're thinking about those images, right, you have to think about how we're traditionally oriented into the world or into society. We have this binary where men are supposed to be in this box, women are supposed to be in this box, and those lines should never cross. When we know that from eons and eons ago, that is not true. There's feminization of men as well as masculine features of women as well. And but all of those characteristics come together and make the whole person. And the reason why those pictures were so polarizing, because you had a man with a baby bump sitting there, right? And it's like something that people are just traditionally not used to seeing. I remember one time, probably the only other time I could remember this was when the gentleman was pregnant on Oprah, and Oprah had the show around the gentleman who was pregnant and was having the baby with his wife. But other than that, you traditionally don't see those images, so it's gonna cause controversy. It's gonna cause that conversations. But what's important about this conversation was those images caused that conversation, but also brought attention to the baby registry as well, which also included that Bail Fund project as well as one of the organizations that receive funds.
Trevon, one thing Lil Nas X says, I've read quotes from him where he says his music is a way to fight for liberation. Again, I think that message is getting lost in some of the controversial and polarizing photographs, as Marcus just highlighted. How do you think, is there a way that we can, change the narrative, expand the narrative, and make sure that people are focused not just on the controversial images, but on what this, for me, I think about this, the guy is 22 years old. Most people at 22 years old can't even figure out, how to make up their bed. And no offense to my millennials, but you get my point. A lot of 22-year-olds are still searching for, better reference, still finding themselves. And Lil Nas in many ways is doing that too. But at 22, he's doing so much more than music. People who've been in this industry for decades, have not been as generous, as philanthropic as he has been. And I just feel like there's got to be a way for us to make sure that message doesn't get lost. So how can we do that?
Yeah, it's us having just conversations like this and really highlighting some of the philanthropic efforts that are actually taking place. And it also gives me a lot of hope for the the next generation of folks, Gen Z, who are up and coming and seeing this level of visibility and affirmation that Lil Nas X represents for them. And him also being, as successful as he is and still finding time to use his platform in these ways. I think it's definitely shifting the conversation, and it's also making us think about the expectations that we have of artists that have similar platforms. And, as much as we talked about DaBaby, the comparison between how DaBaby and T.I. are using their platforms versus how Lil Nas X is using his celebrity and his platform, I think is very different. And I think that the more that we talk about some of the ways that there's this connection between art and advocacy, and how I think that through Lil Nas X's music, he's done a really good job of bringing that to the forefront. And I think that that's really important to think about, and sort of like what it might mean for the next generation of people. I do think that it does challenge a lot of sort of like ideas we have around sort of like what musicians should and shouldn't be doing. I think that, earlier Jarrett mentioned about this idea of Lil Nas X occupying a space that challenges ideas about hypermasculinity. And I think for a long time, I think folks to reap the benefits of hip hop, there had to be sort of like these prescribed ways to exist. And so when I hear that folks feel like Lil Nas X is fighting for liberation, I think that's really what they're talking about, because he is disconstructing this very precise idea of what manhood should look like, and existing and being successful in a way that some of his counterparts and his peers are not. So it gives me a lot of hope that he's also adding this element of advocacy to the conversation, because it's definitely something that I think that more people can do and learn from.
Marcus, when I posted about the show, someone made a comment on Twitter that, Black men are having a hard time. And I wasn't sure if she was making the reference to the fact that Lil Nas X is a part of creating this hard time for Black men, or the fact that people attacking Lil Nas X is a part of, this bigger narrative about Black men having a hard time. But what do you think the impact of Lil Nas X, his music, his presentation and his videos, and his philanthropy, what impact do you think it's having on, notions about how Black men in general should present themselves to the world?
So I think it's really sparking a conversation without really talking about the two words, which is really going on here: power versus vulnerability. Mm-hmm. So like, what does that mean in this context? So having these conversations around like the attack of the Black masculinity, how the feminization of Black men through these images that we're seeing in media. So these conversations are around power and hierarchy and the places that we perceive that we hold in society. And seeing these images breaks down those thoughts that we have. It breaks down those boxes, if you will, that individuals have placed other individuals in. And what this is saying is that I don't need your box. Mm-hmm. I can be free to be who I want to be. Mm-hmm. And it's also having this conversation around vulnerability as well. It's like, not only am I free to be who I want to be, I know that being who I am and who I want to be also will cause controversy, and I'm vulnerable enough to do that. And even in this vulnerability with me being who I am, I hope that other individuals find strength in this vulnerability as well. And also within that vulnerability is power, because we're sitting on this show talking about all of the ways in which he has used this power to actually spark conversation within our community.
Right. Well, with that, got to leave it there, guys. Thank you so much, Marcus. Thank you so much, Trevon, for the work that the both of you are doing in lifting up LGBT organizations working on behalf of criminal justice reform, as well as HIV and AIDS. Really appreciate both of you for joining me this morning. All right, my next guest is Dr. Alisha Jones. She's an assistant professor of folklore and ethnomusicology at Indiana University. Her research includes musical masculinities and global pop music. She's also an author. She's an author of a book Flaming, the peculiar theopolitics of fire and desire in Black male performance. And only a graduate with a PhD from the University of Chicago could have written that book. So I'm super excited to have Dr. Jones joining me this morning. Good morning, Dr. Jones. First question for you is, is Lil Nas X upending the hyper masculine world of rap music?
Well, thank you so much, Areva, for having me. I'm super excited about this conversation. Many would offer that hypermasculinity is actually a form of queerness. Some would say that hypermasculinity is a performance against an imagined masculinity that is unattainable. So if he's upending hypermasculinity, he is still trafficking in forms of queerness, forms of performance that deal with the imagination. He could very well be, or he could actually be expanding our notions of what queerness is.
Yeah, and Jarrett Hill, he's a pop culture journalist, made the observation that Lil Nas X's performance at those MTV Video Awards is what people talked about the next day, but that there were two female rappers on the stage who were, engaged in, very sexually explicit conduct, but that didn't make the headlines the next day. Why is it that this conversation is so sensitive around Black men who are queer? And it seems to be a different conversation, although Debrat, and we'll talk about her a little later, but the conversation around women, gay women, seems to be different, even within this hip hop genre.
Oh, he was spot on. I appreciated that commentary. And it reveals the anxieties that we've had in our community around really protecting Black masculinity, so much so that we discount the histories, experiences of Black women loving other Black women, flirting with other Black women, being romantic or social with other Black women. And it has been to our peril. We don't have their stories because we've been focusing so much on how our Black men or masculine identified figures are received and how that reflects on the power within our community. And it really, if we had the time, we could talk about how this connects to what is left to us through enslavement, how enslavement really affected our ideas of sexual possibility.
So when you look at Lil Nas X, he's not the first LGBT artist who discarded the norm of gender and sexual identity. We were looking for some other examples, and there was Sylvester in the 1970s who flaunted this flamboyant, he wore what would be considered flamboyant outfits, and he was like the queen of disco. Yes. That was back in the 70s. So this isn't a new, phenomenon that we're dealing with in terms of different genres of music. And it's not just hip hop. We should make that very clear too, because we know Lil Nas X had the #1 country song as well. And we know you write a lot about gospel music and what happens in that industry. So help us understand how this issue of homophobia is much bigger than hip hop.
Oh, you've already started weaving together the tapestry because it's related, right? We encompass the top 5 and 6 musics that represent the United States. And many would offer here, I'd say the work of Lauren Currer, who actually creates a genealogy of hip hop music to disco, to the Sylvester James icon. But Sylvester James was also a kindred of the church. Sylvester James would sit up under Bishop Walter Hawkins until the day that he passed away due to the complications of HIV/AIDS. And to be a musician, a good musician, often in the Black community means you've had some interaction with Black church spaces, whether it's disco or hip hop. There's been some interaction, and Sylvester is a good place to start. So
why then do you think, so the hip hop genre, we talked about this hyper masculinity kind of notion, that you don't see that though in the country music and in gospel music. So, do you think Lil Nas X, is that why he is, so controversial, and why Boosie and, the baby, not and the baby, yes, and Ti are having this visceral reaction because hip hop in particular has made its bones on, the tough guy image.
Yeah, I think there's an industry investment in this tough guy image. But there is something about what Lil Nas is doing as a provocateur. He's provoking conversations that we have not wanted to have. Even with his debut single, Old Town Road, that actually was a reclamation of the country music space. Here, I'm thinking of Charlie Pride, who was the voice of country music for so many years and then was outed, if you will, as that voice because his image was never shown. There are aspects of a masculinity, a sort of muscle masculinity that does occur in country music. But within the music industry, there is such an overemphasis on how Black men love one another that we focus on how Black men talk about other Black men. But what if we decided that we would put the loving of each other first more than calling folks out? I wonder how that would be received.
Well, we know hip hop, and if anybody listens to it, so much of it is about women, right? Getting women, abusing women, kicking women to the curb, getting more women, having multiple women, using money, getting money to get more women, women. And then, of course, the P word, is everywhere in rap music. So is a Lil Nas X, is he a problem? Because again, he's messing with this image and this whole theme of we're only here. Our only existence is to make money and get women.
Yeah, they would have us to believe that it's always about objectifying women. I'm of the mind of some of the feminist scholars who would say, there's a love-hate relationship. There's that part of the music industry engine that does sexualize and objectify women. LL Cool J, though, came out early on with I Need Love. Like, there is that loving ballad sort of area of hip hop that we have to let people know that there's that Black love element. And I think Lil Nas does take up that space that, has been generating aggression against women, which is even more reason why we need to support folks who have the quote unquote conscious sort of rap trends. Some people like Common. I like people like Red Pill, Blue Pill, who talk about metaphysics, but they don't get the airtime, and we just have to focus on them. Chance the Rapper, even.
I was going to say Chance the Rapper, absolutely. No, you're right, and they don't get nearly enough airtime, and not nearly enough people know them. So the whole genre gets labeled as just being about these, singers who are objectifying women. I do want to ask you about female artists, though. The Brat, female lesbian artist, she came out years ago. And she said that the rap game, was both misogynistic and homophobic. So she was getting it, all different angles. And she's been out, and she said she had to keep her sexual preferences in the 90s on the low because rumors of being lesbian could really wreck your career, could end your career. And she said for her, for many years, it was about self-preservation. Do you think Lil Nas X being as open about his sexuality is helping other artists to be able to express themselves in a way that DaBaby couldn't do when she first came onto the scene?
Yeah, I think he's helping people to be a whole lot more explicit about who they are and their tastes. I mean, at the risk of being a little explicit on this show, now following people like Frank Ocean, who intimated his same gender relationships. Now we're hearing more about people's preferences, appetites, and tastes that would be heard as homoerotic. Things like anal play. or rimming, these ideas that folks wouldn't have typically talked about, but now they're at least using phrases that folks within LGBTQ communities could readily understand and know what they're tracking. And I would also say that though Debrat and other women artists who have been presumed to be lesbian or same gender loving have not explicitly said they are same gender loving, I would also offer that they've been telling us who they are in other veiled and coded ways in their performances through slang, through affiliation, through collaborations. But I do agree with you. This is a moment where folks are taking a different sort of explicit risk. And it's good to see. It's good to see us having the conversations.
What do you think, though, Megan? I'm now thinking back to other conversations we've had. So I'm thinking about the Megan and Cardi B performance, at that, was it the Grammys? I think it was one of those music awards, where they were doing WAP. Mm-hmm. And there were people who said they had to turn the TV off. They said it was too explicit. And, they were humping or grinding on each other. Why was that so controversial? Why was that so unnerving, so shocking to people, particularly people, if you turn that on, you know that this is so much ingrained in the culture.
Right. And I wonder, even as I think of other instances like Madonna's moment with, was it Britney Spears or another young woman artist, another vocalist? Was there the same sort of outrage when those two white women?
Was it Miley Cyrus? I think it was Miley.
Cool. Was it the same sort of outrage? I mean, there was talk, but was there the same sort of outrage? And I wonder if what's at stake with that example, the WAP example, is that Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion are viewed as objects of male desire, and they, as long as it's on men's terms as opposed to women's terms. That has been Black women's sexuality throughout history. People watching and surveilling it, and then also telling us the extent to which we can be active in our pleasure. So I think the racial dynamics are revealed in that instance
as well. Okay, and I do want to ask you about something. The Nation of Islam have said they've accused Lil Nas X of being a part of a larger conspiracy to feminize Black men. Nobody's shocked that the Nation of Islam would say that. And even Lil Nas X himself has said other Black men, heterosexual men, are shying away from collaborating with him. What do you make of this notion that somehow by proximity, if you're too close to Lil Nas X, or you become effeminate, or this notion that somehow Lil Nas X is leading a whole conspiracy to feminize Black men?
Thank you. Yeah, so you and I have that Chicago affiliation, right? This idea of feminization is actually something I take up in my book. The term defeminization, feminization, and effeminacy actually, it's not peculiar language to the Nation of Islam. They use it. Black churches have used this to talk about this anxiety that these spaces, these participations are the domain of women. And I would offer that, especially for us women, to engage in that language is actually a sign of us internalizing misogyny, or more specifically, misogynoir, as well as a very racist past. Even the term effeminacy was used as a racial slur within colonialism to describe us as a race, a lady of the races. And then our use of the term effeminacy through derivatives like effeminization and defeminization actually suggests that there is something wrong with men who share attributes or traits or features with the women they regard and love and gravitate toward. And I challenge us in the adoption of language of effeminacy and defeminization. What does it mean? What does it convey about ourselves when we say that there's something wrong with men who are like us? Do we say the same of women who are like men? I don't see the same sort of aggression directed toward women in those ways.
Well, really, well, we see the opposite because women who are quote unquote strong, that's more of a masculine trait, right? So you get kudos, you get props, you get praise for being a strong woman, and that is more, of considered a masculine trait. So yes, we praise women who take on the traits and characteristics of men, but yet we malign men who have traits that are thought to be feminine. I could talk to you all day. I've run out of time though, but this is a conversation we must continue. I couldn't even get to, I wanted to talk about Drake and Kanye and how they are opening up this whole hip hop genre by talking about their mental health issues and other, emotional topics that, again, that aren't typically in the songs that we hear by, popular rap artists. But I got to have you back. I want to continue this conversation. Just a pleasure to talk to you. So much knowledge and information on a topic that's way more complex. I think that's one thing I hope my viewers are taking away from this is that when you see a headline about Lil Nas X and you see someone criticizing him, that there's a whole lot in this conversation and lots more than just that headline. But thank you so much, Dr. Jones, for joining me this morning. We will definitely have you back on to continue this conversation.
Thank you so much.
Wow. I want to thank all of my guests this morning. It's been a really interesting conversation. I love when I have super smart guests, men and women on, but particularly you all know I love my smart Black women. So I learned so much from Dr. Jones this morning, but all of the guests have really enlightened me, and I hope you on this larger conversation that we're having about Lil Nas X and hip hop music, country music, gospel music, music in general, and the way they treat artists that won't fit into little boxes that have been defined by this anonymous society. And I just want to give a big shout out to Lil Nas X. He's 22 years old, so always keep that in mind. And if you have young adults in your house, if you've ever raised a kid that got to be the age of 22, you know that 22-year-olds' brains aren't even fully developed yet. So we're talking about a really young man who is just taking the world by storm. And in the midst of that, yes, creating lots of controversy, but controversy sells music, but he's also doing a lot of good. I was super impressed with the way that he released his latest album, tied it to those nonprofit organizations, ensured that money was funneled into those organizations. And as I said, there are folks who've been singing in all genres out here for decades, have not done as much for nonprofits and, bail reform and HIV and AIDS that this young man did after just being on the scene 2 years. So keep that in mind. Just some words to live by before we get out. Progress is progress, even if it's slow. So even if you don't celebrate the music of Lil Nas X, he deserves to be recognized and given a lot of credit for upending an industry that for decades was hostile to gay and lesbian artists for no other reason other than prejudice and ignorance. And he deserves recognition for being his authentic self and bucking the white male heterosexual normative box that the music industry and society want to put him in. Lil Nas X is paving the way for a generation of LGBTQ rappers in the same way that Queen Latifah, Lil Kim, and other female rappers of the 80s paved the way for some of our favorite female hip-hop artists from Cardi B to Lizzo. A decade from now, we will look back and thank this 22-year-old young man for having the vision, the talent, and the courage to change the game. I'm out, y'all. Be safe out there. Don't forget to wear your mask. Remember, we are all in this together. And don't forget to check out Areva Martin Out Loud this Saturday at 10 a.m. PST on KBLA Talk 1580 and via the app at KBLA 1580. Be safe out there.